It was a typical Tuesday morning when I entered Damon's office. The blinds were drawn, the room dimly lit by the glow of his computer screen. His posture was rigid, his gaze fixed on the screen as he adjusted the papers on his desk. He didn't bother looking up when I entered. That was unusual. "Harriet," he finally said, still not lifting his eyes. "We're restructuring the senior management tier." His tone was flat, almost rehearsed. "Your position has been eliminated." I sat across from him, the words barely registering at first. I'd been at Edgestone Financial for 32 years. 32 years of loyalty, hard work, and relationships built with clients and colleagues alike. This couldn't be happening. Not like this. "Pardon?" I asked, my voice calm despite the surge of panic inside me. He sighed and pushed his chair back slightly, finally meeting my gaze. "The restructuring timeline is non-negotiable. We need to make these changes immediately. Human Resources will handle your exit package. They're waiting for you now." I swallowed hard, trying to process the words. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. But there was a weight to the moment that seemed to linger in the air, making it harder to breathe. "I see," I said, my voice unwavering. I had no other response, no other words to offer. I had known this day was coming in some form. It had been a slow burn over the past few months, the aggressive, flashy new management style, the increasing focus on numbers over relationships, the coldness that had crept into every interaction. I just hadn't expected it to happen this way. Not with 8 weeks left before my scheduled retirement. I stood up, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for the door. "Thank you for the opportunity to serve Edgestone," I said, my tone formal but polite. "I wish you and the company continued success." Damon didn't say a word. He didn't stand up, didn't offer a handshake. I couldn't say I was surprised. I walked out of the office, my mind a swirl of disbelief and quiet resignation. The fluorescent lights in the hallway buzzed overhead, but I felt like I was walking through a fog. I'd spent more than half of my life at Edgestone Financial. This was supposed to be the end of a successful career, a chance to retire in peace. Instead, I was being escorted out like a forgotten relic. The elevator doors slid open, and I stepped inside, the cold metal walls closing around me. As the elevator descended, I couldn't help but think of all the years spent climbing up the corporate ladder, the hours of overtime, the weekends spent at client meetings, the sacrifices made for the company. And now it all meant nothing. I glanced at my phone as it buzzed in my purse. It was Laura, my assistant of 12 years. I could already hear the concern in her voice as I answered. "Harriet, I just heard," she said, her voice shaky. "This is outrageous. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Laura," I said, my voice steady. "It's business. Nothing personal." But even as I said the words, I knew they weren't entirely true. It was personal. It had always been personal for me. Laura didn't respond immediately, and I could hear the frustration in her silence. "What are you going to do?" she finally asked. "I don't know yet," I replied, looking out the elevator's glass window. The city below seemed so distant, so foreign. It was the same city I had lived in for all these years, but now it felt like a place where I no longer belonged. The elevator slowed and the doors opened. As I walked toward the exit, a security guard, hired just a few months ago, fell into step beside me. He didn't look at me, but I could feel his eyes on me. There was something uncomfortable about being escorted out of a place that had once been my home. We walked past my office, my former office, and I felt a pang of regret. It had been the hub of my world for so long. I had helped build the department from the ground up, created a legacy that had made Edgestone the company it was today. Now all that was gone in an instant. The security guard, Kevin, carried a small box containing my personal belongings, a few photos, a potted plant, and my coffee mug, the one my grandson had painted for me last Christmas. I couldn't help but feel a sense of futility as I glanced at the box. 32 years, and this was all I had to show for it. As I reached my car, I noticed that Kevin was trying to make conversation, but I couldn't muster the energy to respond. My mind was elsewhere. This wasn't how I had imagined my last days at Edgestone. The parking lot seemed so empty, so cold. It wasn't the bustling space it used to be, filled with colleagues and clients. Now it felt like a parking lot for the forgotten. Kevin put the box in my trunk and gave me a small, awkward smile. "Sorry, Harriet," he said. "I know this doesn't feel right." I gave him a tight smile and nodded. "Don't worry about it, Kevin. You're just doing your job." The drive home was a blur. I didn't even notice the usual landmarks or the traffic jams. I was too focused on the events of the morning. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Thomas, my husband. He could always tell when something was wrong, even over the phone. "Harriet, what's going on? Why are you home so early?" His voice was full of concern. "I've been let go," I said simply, the words leaving my mouth with an unsettling calmness. "Restructured. Effective immediately." For a moment, there was silence on the other end of the line. I could picture him pacing the kitchen, his mind racing. "Harriet, this is insane. They can't just do that to you. After everything you've done for them." "It's done, Thomas," I said, finally feeling the weight of the words. "No point getting worked up about it now. We'll figure it out." I wasn't angry, not yet. There was just a hollow feeling in my chest, like a part of me had been ripped away. I had spent so many years working for Edgestone, believing in its mission, its vision. And now it seemed like none of that mattered. I barely noticed the drive home, my thoughts consumed by the events of the day. The drive, which should have been filled with the quiet hum of familiar streets, instead felt like a distant memory. I felt detached, as if I were floating above the world, looking down at the life I had built and wondering if it had all been for nothing. Thomas was waiting for me at the door when I arrived. His face registered concern, but there was something else there too, an instinctual protectiveness, like he wanted to shield me from the crushing reality of the situation. "Harriet, you didn't deserve this," he said, his voice heavy with disbelief. "You've worked for them for over 3 decades. This isn't how it's supposed to end." I shrugged off my coat and set my box down on the kitchen counter, its contents feeling more like a symbol of defeat than a collection of personal items. "It's done, Thomas," I said, my voice sounding hollow. "There's nothing to fix now." "But it's not just about them, Harriet," he said, following me into the kitchen. "This is about you. This is your life, your career. Don't let them get away with it." I sighed and leaned against the counter, running a hand through my hair. I didn't want this fight. I wanted to retire quietly, to take the trip to Italy we've been planning for years. But now they've pushed you to the edge, he finished for me. "You're still Harriet Vaughn. You still have power. And don't you dare forget that." I looked at him, feeling the weight of his words sink in. He was right. I had spent so many years making other people's dreams a reality that I had neglected to protect my own. The idea of standing up for myself felt foreign, yet strangely liberating. I wasn't just a cog in the machine anymore. I had a choice. The doorbell rang, cutting through my thoughts. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I opened the door, wondering who it could be. To my surprise, it was Laura, my former assistant, standing on the doorstep, her face filled with concern. "I came as soon as I heard," she said, her voice soft but filled with determination. "Harriet, I'm so sorry." I stepped aside, letting her in. As she entered, I noticed how quiet the house had become, almost too quiet for comfort. The weight of the day seemed to settle into the air, pressing down on everything it touched. "You don't have to apologize, Laura," I said, shaking my head. "This isn't your fault." "I know," she replied, her eyes brimming with sympathy. "But I can't help but feel responsible. I was with you through it all. I saw the work you put in." I sighed and slumped into a chair, suddenly feeling the exhaustion of the day catch up with me. "It doesn't make sense, Laura. I've given my life to that company. They wouldn't be where they are without me. And this is how they repay me? Just toss me aside like I never mattered?" "Harriet, you do matter," Laura said, sitting beside me. "And if you want to fight back, you're not alone. I'll be with you every step of the way. You've earned the right to be angry, but you've also earned the right to reclaim your life." Her words were a balm to my wounded spirit, but there was still a lingering doubt, a whisper in the back of my mind asking if it was worth it. But as I looked at her, I realized something. Maybe this was the beginning of a new chapter. Not just for me, but for everyone who had ever been overlooked, discarded, or pushed aside in favor of someone younger, someone hungrier for power. "Thank you, Laura," I said quietly. "I don't know what comes next, but I know I can't let them win by fading away quietly. I'm going to fight for what I've built, for what's mine." Laura nodded, determination flickering in her eyes. "We'll make sure the world knows exactly who you are. You won't be forgotten." The phone call with Charles Denham came the following morning, cutting through the heavy silence that had enveloped my home. I hadn't expected him to call so soon, but I wasn't surprised either. Charles was a man of action, and if there was one thing I had learned from our decades of working together, it was that he didn't waste time when it came to protecting his interests. "Harriet," he began, his voice firm but tinged with frustration, "I spoke with Damon last night. Let me tell you, the man doesn't even know how to run a lemonade stand, let alone a company like Cal Ridge." I couldn't help but chuckle, though the sound felt foreign to my ears, a reminder of the life I used to lead before all of this chaos began. "I appreciate you standing by me, Charles," I said, my voice quieter now but resolute. "But you need to understand that this isn't just about me anymore. It's about the company. It's about the relationships that are being destroyed." "I know," he replied quickly. "And that's why we need to act. I've already begun speaking with some of our other investors, and I'm telling you, this isn't going to stand. You've been with that company longer than anyone else. If anyone can put things back on track, it's you." I could feel his sincerity, but I also knew it wasn't just about saving the company. It was about proving a point to Damon and the board. If I walked away now, they would think they had one. And I wasn't about to let that happen. "I'm not going to walk away from this, Charles," I said, standing up from the kitchen table, my resolve firming. "But I'm not going to do it the way they expect me to. I'm going to take control of the situation, and I'm going to make sure that Cal Ridge becomes what it was always meant to be." "Good," Charles said. "And I'll back you every step of the way. But we need a plan, Harriet. We need to make them understand that their decisions have consequences." I paused, my mind racing as I considered my next move. What Charles didn't know was that I had already started drafting that plan in my head. The idea had been forming over the past few hours, ever since I had stood outside Cal Ridge and realized that, for the first time in over 30 years, I had nothing to lose. "I'm going to meet with the board," I said slowly, my voice gaining strength with each word. "But not the way they expect. I'm not going in there to beg for my position back. I'm going to walk in and make them an offer they can't refuse." By noon, I had arranged a meeting with Philip Peterson, Victoria Coleman, and a few other board members. I hadn't yet told Charles or the others what my plan was. Part of me wanted to keep it close to my chest, but the other part knew they'd be waiting for me to make a move. I dressed for the occasion. Not in the suit that screamed corporate, but in something that felt more like me, a tailored dark green dress that accentuated my strength and confidence, without shouting it from the rooftops. I didn't need to scream. My presence would speak for itself. The drive to Cal Ridge felt different this time. I wasn't the defeated woman leaving her career behind. I wasn't the one who had been cast aside. No, this time I was going in as someone who was ready to reclaim what was mine. When I arrived at the building, I walked past the security guards who had once greeted me with respect. Now their gaze was filled with uncertainty, as though they weren't sure what to expect from me. I didn't care. I entered the boardroom to find Philip and Victoria already seated, the usual tension in the air. But today it wasn't the same. They knew what had happened. They knew the company was on the verge of collapse, and now they were looking to me to fix it. "Harriet," Victoria greeted me, her voice tight but respectful. "Thank you for meeting with us on such short notice." I nodded, taking my seat at the head of the table. I wasn't there to make excuses or plead for my job. I was here to take charge. "You've made a mistake, Victoria," I said, looking directly at her. "The company needs more than just a new CEO. It needs a complete shift in direction. And I'm the one who's going to make that happen." "Harriet, we've already discussed," Philip began, but I cut him off with a sharp gesture. "I'm not here to discuss. I'm here to fix this," I said, my voice calm but unwavering. "And that means restoring the relationships you've so carelessly thrown away in the name of short-term gains." I paused, letting the weight of my words settle over them. I'm not going to work under Damon Shore. He doesn't have what it takes to lead this company. But I'm willing to help you rebuild if you're willing to let me lead. Victoria looked at Philip, and I could see the silent conversation happening between them. They were considering it, weighing the cost of keeping me on their side versus losing the last shred of credibility they had. I'm not asking for the CEO position, I continued, but I'm not going to be a figurehead either. If I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it right. I want full control over the client relationships and the direction we take in restoring Cal Ridge's reputation. And I want a commitment from you, no more restructuring without consulting me. We're in this together or we're not in it at all. The room fell silent. It was a bold move, one that would either break them or bring them to their knees. I'll need time to think about this, Philip said, his voice soft but filled with the weight of a decision yet to be made. We'll get back to you. Don't take too long, I said, standing up. The clock is ticking. I left the boardroom with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. There was no turning back now. The plan was set and the ball was in their court. But I couldn't afford to sit idly by and wait for their decision. If I was going to make this work, I needed to take action and fast. The following morning, I met with my assistant, Laura. She had been with me for over 12 years, and I trusted her with everything, from the smallest details of my day-to-day work to the largest decisions of my career. Today, I needed her insight more than ever. Harriet, she said, concern clear in her voice, are you sure about this? You know how the board works. If they don't get what they want, they won't hesitate to find someone else. It's not personal, it's just business. I know, Laura, I replied, my tone steady. But this isn't just about business anymore. This is about integrity. If I let them take control, if I let Damon have his way, we'll lose everything we've built. I could see the worry in her eyes, but she nodded, showing her support. Then you need to be ready for whatever comes next. The next few days were a whirlwind. I spent my time meeting with key investors, reaching out to old colleagues, and preparing for what I knew would be an intense battle. The pressure was mounting, but I couldn't afford to back down. Not now. By Friday afternoon, I received the call from Philip Peterson. Harriet, he said, his voice unusually tentative, we've discussed your proposal. And while it's a bold move, we're willing to give it a shot. But you need to understand this isn't going to be easy. I didn't expect it to be, I said, leaning back in my chair as I heard his words. But I'm not going to ask for something I'm not willing to fight for. If I'm going to take this role, I need full authority. No more micromanagement, no more half measures. I will take full responsibility for the client relationships and the strategic direction of Cal Ridge. If you want me to do this, you'll need to trust me. There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear Philip shifting in his seat. And what about Damon? We'll deal with Damon later, I said firmly. He'll have a role, but he won't be in charge of client relationships anymore. His leadership style is too aggressive for this company. It's time for a change. You're asking a lot, Harriet, Philip said. But I believe in you. I'm willing to make it work. You have the job. I felt a surge of triumph, but I knew this was just the beginning. I wasn't naive enough to think that this would be a smooth transition. The board was still reeling from the fallout of Damon's short tenure, and I would have to fight to maintain my position and influence. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control returning to my life. The following Monday, I met with the board again, this time with the full weight of my decision behind me. I had the authority now, and I wasn't going to let it slip through my fingers. As I walked into the boardroom, I could feel the eyes of the directors on me, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Thank you for agreeing to meet again, Harriet, Philip said, his voice a bit more respectful now. We've reviewed your proposal and we're ready to move forward. I took my seat at the head of the table, my posture confident. I'm not here to negotiate anymore, I said, my voice cutting through the tension. I'm here to lead. The room fell silent as I laid out my vision for Cal Ridge's future. I would bring the company back to its roots, relationships first, profit second. I would ensure that the investments we made were based on long-term partnerships, not just quick returns. I would reinstate the senior relationship managers Damon had let go and rebuild the trust we had lost with our clients. As I spoke, I could see the board members nodding, some more reluctantly than others. They were listening. They were starting to understand. But there was one hurdle left to clear: Damon. "Harriet," Victoria Coleman spoke up, her voice hesitant. "You've made it clear that you want full control of the company's direction. But what about Damon? He's the CEO and he's not going to step aside without a fight." "I'm not asking him to step aside," I said firmly. "I'm asking him to step into a new role. One where he can use his strengths, but without the power to undermine the relationships that have been built over the years." "That's going to be a hard sell," Victoria muttered, looking at Philip. "But it might just work." I nodded. "I'm not expecting an easy transition. But if we can get the investors on board, if we can prove to them that this company is worth saving, we'll have the leverage we need." The room was still, everyone absorbed in their thoughts. Finally, Philip spoke up again. "We'll back you, Harriet," he said, his voice resolute. "But you need to understand that the road ahead is going to be rocky. If this doesn't work, we'll all be in trouble." "I understand," I replied. "But I'm not walking away from this. Not without making sure Cal Ridge becomes the company it was always meant to be." As I left the meeting, I felt the weight of the decisions ahead of me. There was no turning back now. The fight for Cal Ridge had only just begun. The days following the board meeting were tense. I knew that while I had secured their support, the real challenge was still ahead. Rebuilding trust, not just with the investors but with the team, the clients, and even myself, would take time and precision. But the foundation had been laid, and now it was time to build something stronger. I immediately set to work reorganizing the senior management team. The first order of business was reinstating the senior relationship managers Damon had dismissed. These were the people who had been the backbone of the firm, who had built the relationships that had kept Cal Ridge going for years. They had been casualties of Damon's aggressive, growth-at-all-costs mindset, and it was time to bring them back into the fold. I met with each one personally, beginning with Charles Denham, our largest investor and one of the most influential figures in the firm's history. It was essential that he saw the changes I was making as genuine, not just a reaction to the chaos Damon had caused. "Harriet," he said as we sat down in his office, his demeanor guarded but not unfriendly, "I'm glad to see you back in control. But you know as well as I do that trust doesn't come back overnight." "I know, Charles," I said, leaning forward. "This is going to take time, but I'm committed to making sure that we rebuild the right way. I'm not interested in making fast money at the expense of relationships. We're going back to the roots of this business. Long-term growth, sustainable partnerships. That's the way forward." Charles studied me for a long moment before nodding. "I'm willing to give you that chance, Harriet. But you have to understand, if you can't bring this back, we'll have no choice but to look elsewhere." "I won't let you down," I replied firmly. After our meeting, I called Laura into my office. She had been a rock during the entire ordeal, and I needed her more than ever now. "Laura, we're making some significant changes," I said. "I'm bringing back the senior managers Damon let go. It's time we show the investors that we're serious about restoring the integrity of this firm." "I'm with you, Harriet," she said, her eyes bright with determination. "I've got your back no matter what." That same evening, I had dinner with Eleanor Blackwood and Jeffrey Williams, two of the most powerful figures in the industry and my most trusted allies. We met at our usual spot, Mercer's, a quiet but elegant steakhouse that had become a refuge for us over the years. "Harriet," Eleanor said as I sat down, her expression serious, "I know you've made strides with the board, but this isn't over. Damon is still CEO, and he's not going to go quietly." "I'm aware," I replied, taking a sip of my wine. "But I've made my position clear. I've already reached out to the senior managers we need to reinstate, and I'm working with the board to ensure they understand this is the right direction. But I need your help. We need to get the investors back on board." Eleanor nodded. "We've been in this business long enough to know that trust is fragile. But you've got the right idea. It's not about growth at any cost. It's about finding a balance between profitability and relationships." "I couldn't agree more," I said. This isn't just about salvaging the firm. It's about preserving the legacy we've built here. The next few weeks were filled with meetings, late-night calls, and strategy sessions. The process of rebuilding wasn't easy. Every decision felt monumental, and with each step forward, I was acutely aware of the risk of failure. But I wasn't about to back down. The investors began to respond. Slowly at first, but their confidence was building. The senior managers I had reinstated were getting to work, and the atmosphere at Cal Ridge was starting to shift. People were beginning to trust the vision I had laid out, and they were seeing the changes take root. Damon, however, was proving to be a more complicated issue. Though he was no longer in charge of client relations, he was still holding on to the role of CEO. He was pushing back at every turn, questioning decisions, undermining my authority wherever he could. I knew he was trying to find a way back into control, and I couldn't let that happen. One evening, after a particularly tense meeting with the board, I found myself in my office late, reflecting on the situation. The phone rang and I saw Damon's name on the caller ID. I hesitated for a moment before picking it up. "Harriet," his voice was tight with restrained emotion. "I know this isn't what you wanted, but you need to understand something. I built this company into what it is today. You can't just come in and dismantle everything I've worked for." I took a deep breath, staying calm. "I'm not dismantling anything, Damon. I'm restoring what's been lost. This firm was built on relationships, not just profits. You pushed that aside in favor of short-term gains, and it nearly cost us everything." "Don't talk to me about what's best for Cal Ridge," he shot back. "I've done more for this company than you ever will." I could feel my pulse quicken, but I didn't let his words get to me. "You've made your decisions, Damon. Now it's my turn. I'm not interested in fighting you. I'm interested in doing what's right for this firm and for the people who have stuck with us all these years." "You'll regret this," Damon's voice was low, almost threatening. "I already have," I replied. "But I'm not backing down." As the phone clicked off, I knew this was far from over. Damon wouldn't give up easily. But neither would I. The battle for Cal Ridge's soul was just beginning. I knew that what happened next would define the future of the company. I was ready to take on whatever came my way, but it wasn't going to be easy. There was no turning back. The question was, who would come out on top? I woke up the next morning with a quiet determination. The events of the past few weeks had been an emotional roller coaster, but I was more resolved than ever to take control of the situation. The world around me was changing, and I had to keep pace. There was no room for hesitation now. The day began with a meeting with Laura. She had been working behind the scenes, coordinating the efforts of the reinstated senior managers. Her dedication had been a lifeline for me in these uncertain times, and I was grateful for it. "Harriet," she said, her voice firm yet reassuring, "we've got the momentum now. The senior team is on board and they're all pushing forward. We've got a good foundation, but we need to make sure we don't let Damon gain any ground. I'm worried that he might try something big soon." "I know," I replied, leaning forward, the weight of the task ahead pressing on me. "Damon's not going to give up without a fight. But we have to stay focused. We've got to make the right decisions, and we have to do it quickly." Laura nodded, her eyes narrowing with focus. "And what about the investors? Have they fully committed?" "They're getting there," I said, though my voice wavered slightly. "But we need to make sure they understand the new direction. They need to see that we're serious about the changes we're implementing." "Well, we can certainly prove it," she said with a smile. "We'll make them believe in the future of this company again." Later that day, I met with Charles Denham, one of our most influential investors. He had been a major supporter of Cal Ridge for years, and his backing was crucial to securing the firm's financial future. If anyone had doubts about the future, it was Charles. When I arrived at his office, Charles didn't waste any time. "Harriet," he began, his voice serious, "I've been keeping an eye on things and I know what's been going on. I can see you're working hard to turn things around, but I have to ask, do you really think you can fix this mess?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I do, Charles. I know it's going to take time, but I've already made changes and I'm committed to seeing this through. This firm was built on relationships, and that's the foundation I'm going to rebuild it on." Charles looked at me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. All right, Harriet. You've got my support for now. But you need to show me results. If things don't improve, I can't continue backing you. Understood, I said, keeping my voice steady. I'll make sure you see those results. As I left his office, I couldn't shake the feeling that Charles's trust was on a razor's edge. One wrong move and the whole thing could come crashing down. That evening, I received a call from Eleanor Blackwood. She had been one of my closest allies for years, and her support was invaluable during this turbulent time. Harriet, she said, her voice warm but with an edge of concern, how are you holding up? I'm fine, Eleanor, I replied, forcing a smile despite the fatigue weighing on me. There's a lot of pressure, but I'm handling it. I'm taking control of things, one step at a time. I hope so, she said, her voice turning serious. You know how I feel about Damon, and you know how dangerous he can be. You've got to be careful. He's got a way of making things seem like they're under control when they're really not. I'm aware, I said, the reminder of Damon's manipulative tactics sending a shiver down my spine. But I'm not letting him take control again. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure this firm stays on track. Eleanor sighed softly. I'm glad to hear that. Just remember, Harriet, there's no going back after this. You've chosen a side and now you have to follow through. I will, I said, my voice firm. I'm not backing down. The following days were a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and decisions. I continued to focus on rebuilding relationships with the investors, while also dealing with the internal issues at Cal Ridge. Damon's presence in the office was a constant reminder of the tension in the air. His attitude was becoming increasingly erratic, and it was clear he was looking for ways to undermine my authority. One afternoon, as I walked through the hallways of the Cal Ridge office, I noticed Damon standing at the far end of the corridor. He was talking to one of the senior analysts, a new hire who had only been with the firm for a few months. As I approached, Damon's conversation fell silent, and the analyst quickly excused himself, scurrying away as if he had been caught in something he wasn't supposed to see. Harriet, Damon said, his voice icy as I approached him. I hope you're not expecting me to just roll over. I built this firm. I'm not going to let you take it from me without a fight. I met his gaze, refusing to let him intimidate me. I'm not here to fight, Damon, I said, my voice cold. I'm here to rebuild. This isn't about you or me. It's about the future of Cal Ridge. Don't pretend you're doing this for the company, he shot back. You're doing it for your own ego. You've always been too proud for your own good. I felt a surge of anger rising in my chest, but I kept my composure. This isn't about ego. This is about doing what's right for the people who have stuck with this firm through thick and thin. And if you can't see that, then maybe it's time for you to move on. Damon's eyes flashed with fury, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned on his heel and stormed off, leaving me standing there, my heart racing. The confrontation with Damon was a turning point. It became clear that he wasn't going to go down without a fight. But I had made my decision. I wasn't going to let him tear this company apart. I had come this far, and I wasn't backing down now. The real work had only just begun. The days following my confrontation with Damon were a blur of strategy and counter-strategy. The tension in the office was palpable, a thick undercurrent of uncertainty that seemed to affect everyone. People were talking, whispering behind closed doors, and I knew that the stability of Cal Ridge was hanging by a thread. Every decision felt like a gamble, but I had no choice but to press forward. I spent hours in meetings with the senior management team, ensuring that they were all aligned with the new direction. The restructuring was taking shape, but there was still so much work to be done. We had to move fast. The investors were waiting, and they wouldn't wait forever. As the week dragged on, I couldn't shake the feeling that Damon was watching my every move, waiting for an opportunity to strike. It wasn't just his presence that unsettled me, it was the feeling that he was trying to manipulate everyone around him. He had always been good at that. But this time, I wasn't going to let him have the upper hand. One afternoon, I called a meeting with the board to address the growing concerns about the restructuring. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me as I entered the room, but I didn't let it faze me. I had a plan, and I was going to see it through. Thank you for joining me today, I began, taking my seat at the head of the table. I know there have been a lot of questions about the direction we're taking, and I want to address them head-on. I understand the concerns about the restructuring, but I want to assure you that this is the right move for the future of Cal Ridge. Philip Peterson, the chairman of the board, was the first to speak. Harriet, we all know you've been a loyal servant to this company for decades, but there's a lot at stake here. The restructuring has caused some friction with our key investors, and we need to make sure we're making the right moves. I understand, Philip, I said, holding his gaze. But this is not just about maintaining the status quo. We've been too complacent for too long. We've relied on relationships, and while that's important, we've neglected the need for innovation. That's why we're making these changes, so we can move forward and thrive. Eleanor Blackwood, who had always been one of my strongest allies, nodded in agreement. I agree with Harriet. The world is changing, and if we want to stay relevant, we have to adapt. But we can't forget what made us successful in the first place. Exactly, I added. The relationships we've built over the years are crucial, but we also need to embrace new technologies and approaches. It's about finding balance. And that's what I'm working toward. The room was silent for a moment as the board members exchanged glances. It was clear that they were still uncertain, but they were listening. That was all I needed for now. That's why I'm proposing that we create a new position, I continued, the Chief Relationship Officer. This role will ensure that we don't lose sight of our core values while also pushing the company forward. It will be my role to oversee this transition and make sure we don't lose the trust of our investors. Charles Denham, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. And what happens with Damon? Is he going to continue his role in this company? I took a deep breath before responding. Damon's future is uncertain. We need to evaluate his position carefully, but for now he will remain in his current role. I've made it clear to him that his approach needs to change, or there will be consequences. The tension in the room was thick, but I could sense that my proposal was beginning to take hold. The board members were starting to see the vision I had for the company. It was clear that they had doubts, but they also knew that I had been at the helm for far too long to back down now. The rest of the week passed in a blur. I worked tirelessly to meet with investors, explain the changes, and reassure them that Cal Ridge was still a reliable partner. Some of them were more receptive than others, but I remained confident that we could win them over. Meanwhile, Damon continued to lurk in the background, his presence always felt but never acknowledged. It was clear that he wasn't going to accept the changes without a fight. I could see it in his eyes whenever we crossed paths in the hallway, his gaze filled with contempt. But I wasn't going to let him intimidate me. I had bigger things to worry about. The following Friday, I received an unexpected call from Charles Denham. Harriet, he said, his voice strained, I've been talking to some of the other investors, and there's a lot of concern about Damon's influence. They're not convinced that he's the right leader for this company. I sighed, rubbing my forehead as I sat down at my desk. I know, Charles. I'm doing everything I can to assure them that we're on the right track. But I can't control Damon's actions. I've made my position clear to him, but he's not one to back down easily. That's the problem, Charles said bluntly. We're worried that he's going to sabotage everything you're trying to build. If he continues to make moves behind the scenes, it's going to hurt the company in the long run. I clenched my fists, frustration bubbling up inside me. I'm aware of the risks, Charles. But I can't let him dictate the future of this company. I'll do whatever it takes to protect Cal Ridge. There was a long pause before Charles spoke again. I don't think you fully understand, Harriet. You're the one who has to step up and take control. This is your company now, and if you don't take charge, I'm afraid it might be too late. Later that evening, as I sat alone in my office, I thought about what Charles had said. It was clear that this was no longer just about the restructuring or the investors. This was about power, who would hold it, and who would be left standing when the dust settled. I had come to Cal Ridge 32 years ago with nothing but ambition and drive. I had built this company from the ground up, and I wasn't about to let someone like Damon destroy it all. The next morning, I called a meeting with the board. It was time to make a decision, and I knew that I couldn't afford to wait any longer. The air in the boardroom was heavy with tension when I walked in. The members of the board, once my allies, now seemed like strangers. The faces that had once trusted me, who had supported my every move for over 3 decades, were now clouded with doubt. Even Philip, who had been a long-time confidant, looked uncertain. The weight of the moment settled heavily on my shoulders, but I couldn't afford to falter now. This was the turning point. I took my seat at the head of the table, making eye contact with each of the board members. They were all waiting for me to speak, to tell them what came next. But I wasn't sure I had an answer for them, not the one they were hoping for. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Philip began, his voice calm but edged with an urgency I hadn't expected. "Harriet, we're in a difficult position. We need to know what your intentions are moving forward. The board wants clarity." "Clarity," I repeated, leaning back in my chair. "I understand. But before I can give you an answer, I need you to understand something. This isn't just about the restructuring or the financials. This is about the future of Cal Ridge." Victoria, who had always been one of my staunchest supporters, leaned forward. "And what is that future, Harriet? You've been at the helm for decades. But now the landscape is changing. The world is evolving, and we need someone who can guide us through it." I nodded slowly, carefully choosing my words. "I've spent 32 years building this company from the ground up. I've sacrificed relationships, family time, and my own personal life to ensure that Cal Ridge became what it is today. And I'm not ready to let it go. But I need to be clear, this company has become something that I no longer recognize." The silence in the room was deafening. I could see the members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. They knew exactly what I was talking about. They had all seen it, the slow erosion of the values that had once made Cal Ridge a leader in the industry. Damon's aggressive tactics, his cold, calculating approach, had shaken the foundation we had all worked so hard to build. "I understand the need for change," I continued. "But I won't stand by and watch this company turn into something it's not. We've always been about relationships, about building trust, and about putting our clients first. That's what made us successful. And if we're going to move forward, we need to return to those values." Philip's expression softened slightly. "We agree with you, Harriet. But the investors want quick returns. They're not interested in the slow and steady approach anymore. We can't afford to go back to the old way of doing things." I shook my head. "That's where you're wrong. The investors may want quick returns, but what they don't realize is that those returns will not be sustainable. You can't sacrifice long-term relationships for short-term profits. It's a recipe for disaster." Eleanor, who had been quiet up until this point, spoke up. "Harriet, we've all seen the shifts in the industry. The new CEO, Damon, has brought in a more aggressive strategy. Maybe that's what we need to survive in this new world." I looked at her, my eyes narrowing slightly. "You're willing to risk everything we've built just to keep up with a trend?" I asked, my voice steady but laced with disbelief. "What happens when the market shifts again? What happens when the algorithms stop working and the investors pull their money out? What happens to Cal Ridge then?" The room went silent again. I could feel the weight of their decision pressing down on them. They all knew that I was right. They had to know that if we didn't return to our roots, we would be lost. "I'm not asking for a return to the past," I said, finally breaking the silence. "I'm asking for a balance. We need to embrace innovation, but we can't forget what made us successful in the first place. We need to bring in new leadership, but we also need to respect the relationships we've built." The tension in the room was palpable. It was clear that the board was divided. But I didn't have time to wait for them to come to a decision. I had already made up my mind. "I'll stay," I said, surprising even myself. "But only if you make me the CEO. Not as a figurehead, but as the leader I've always been. I will lead Cal Ridge back to the values that made it great. And if you're willing to follow me, I'll make sure we thrive." The board members exchanged uneasy glances. I could see the uncertainty in their eyes, but I knew they were beginning to understand. I had taken control of the situation, and there was no going back now. "Harriet," Philip began, his voice calm but filled with respect. "We'll need to discuss this further. But you've made your position clear." "Good," I replied, standing up from my chair. "I'll give you the time you need, but I won't wait forever. Cal Ridge needs to make a decision, and it needs to happen now. That evening, I found myself back at home, sitting in my study with a glass of wine in hand. I had done what I needed to do, but I still felt a sense of unease. I had taken a bold step, but it wasn't without its risks. The future of Cal Ridge was now in my hands, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for the weight of that responsibility. Thomas joined me in the study after dinner, sitting across from me with a concerned look on his face. "How did it go?" he asked, his voice low. "I made my move," I said, my voice steady despite the uncertainty I felt. "I've told them what I want. It's up to them now." "And what do you want?" he asked, his gaze intense. I paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. "I want to take back control of this company. I want to restore it to what it once was. And I want to do it on my terms." Thomas nodded slowly, understanding. "Then do it, Harriet. You've earned it." The following week was a whirlwind of meetings, phone calls, and late nights. I met with the board several times to finalize the details of my new role, negotiating the terms and pushing for the changes I knew were necessary. I had no intention of backing down. This was my company, and I was going to make sure it stayed that way. By the end of the week, the decision was made. The board had agreed to my terms. I was the new CEO of Cal Ridge, and I was determined to lead the company back to greatness. The weight of the decision settled on my shoulders, but it was different this time. There was no doubt, no hesitation. This was the beginning of something new, something that would shape the future of Cal Ridge and perhaps even redefine the entire industry. I wasn't just stepping into a new role, I was stepping into the heart of the company I had spent over 3 decades building. And for the first time in years, I felt the surge of excitement I hadn't felt since the early days of my career. The first few days were a blur. There were meetings with the board to finalize the restructuring process. There were phone calls to investors, making sure that they understood the vision I had for the company's future. And most importantly, there was the task of regaining the trust that had been lost under Damon's leadership. The one thing I knew for sure was that I couldn't do it alone. I needed the right people by my side, the ones who understood what Cal Ridge was really about. So I reached out to those who had been loyal to the company, those who had stuck around even when things were tough. Victoria, who had always been a close ally, was the first person I called. "I need you back, Victoria," I said, my voice steady but filled with urgency. "I'm taking over as CEO, but I need someone I can trust to help me rebuild the team. The old way of doing things has to go." There was a long pause before she responded. "I knew it," she said, her voice a mix of admiration and caution. "I knew you wouldn't back down. I'll help you, Harriet. But you have to promise me one thing." "What's that?" I asked, already knowing what she was going to say. "You have to promise me that you won't let the board sway you. They'll try to steer you in the wrong direction, and you can't let them. You have to trust your instincts." I didn't need any more convincing. "I promise," I said, feeling the weight of her words. "This company is going to change, but it's going to change for the better." The days that followed were filled with constant planning and reorganization. There were cuts to be made, new strategies to be implemented, and countless decisions to be made. But through it all, I never lost sight of the bigger picture. This was about the future of Cal Ridge, but it was also about restoring the integrity and the relationships that had made us successful in the first place. I met with key investors, including Charles, Eleanor, and Jeffrey, who had been a part of the foundation of the company. Their support meant everything to me. They were skeptical at first, but I knew that if I could convince them, the rest would follow. "It's been a rough few months," Charles said during our first meeting. "But if you're sure this is the right move, Harriet, I'll back you." Eleanor, always the realist, added, "You're not just doing this for you, Harriet. You're doing this for all of us. We've all got a stake in this." I nodded. "I know. And that's why I can't afford to fail. I won't fail." With the support of the board and the investors, we moved forward with the restructuring. We cut away the dead weight, the practices that had been holding us back, and we focused on what mattered: our relationships with our clients, our investors, and our employees. These were the things that had built Cal Ridge, and they were the things that would ensure its future. There were challenges, of course. Damon wasn't happy about the changes, but he had been removed from the day-to-day operations, and now it was up to the board to figure out where he fit into the new structure. He wasn't the right person to lead the company, and it was time for him to move on. The first week of my tenure as CEO was a success. We had already started to make changes, and the investors were beginning to see the fruits of our labor. But there was still much work to be done. The company needed a new vision, a new direction. And that vision was going to come from me. As I sat in my office, looking out over the skyline of the city, I realized that this was just the beginning. There were still hurdles to overcome, but I was ready. I had spent my entire career preparing for this moment, and now it was time to lead. I wasn't just going to be the CEO of Cal Ridge. I was going to restore it to its former glory, making it stronger and more resilient than it had ever been before. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I was ready for whatever came next. This wasn't just about business. This was personal. This was my legacy. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Every day seemed to bring new challenges and unexpected turns. But through it all, one thing became clear: my approach was working. Cal Ridge, once on the brink of collapse, was slowly but surely starting to rebuild its foundation. The investors who had pulled their money were slowly coming back. It wasn't easy, but it was happening. One by one, I re-established the relationships that had been shaken under Damon's short tenure. I spent long hours on the phone, in meetings, and sometimes, in casual settings, reconnecting with the people who had helped make Cal Ridge what it was. It was a slow process, but I knew the value of patience. During one of these meetings, I found myself sitting across from Eleanor Blackwood, a woman who had become a mentor to me over the years. Her company, Zentron Global, had been one of the first to withdraw from the funding round, and it had stung. "I'm glad to see you're back in the driver's seat, Harriet," she said as she sipped her bourbon, a knowing smile on her lips. "You always did have the right vision, even if the board didn't always see it." I chuckled, leaning back in my chair. "I guess some lessons are harder to learn than others, Eleanor. But you know as well as I do, it's not just about the numbers. It's about relationships. That's what Cal Ridge has always been built on, and that's what we're going to rebuild." She nodded, her gaze sharp. "I couldn't agree more. But don't let the board distract you. They'll push for results, but you need to remember what matters. The people who trust you, the ones who've stood by you all these years." It was the same advice I had heard before, but it hit differently now. For so long, I had been so focused on climbing the corporate ladder, making sure everything was perfect on paper, that I had forgotten what had truly made the company great: the people. The clients who had trusted us, the team that had worked tirelessly to deliver results, and the relationships that had been forged over decades. "Don't worry," I said, straightening up. "I won't forget that. I have a plan, and it starts with getting back to basics." As the weeks turned into months, the transformation at Cal Ridge became more apparent. We had re-established some key relationships, and the funding we had lost began to trickle back in. But I knew that we couldn't rely on just that. The real work had to be done internally. The first big decision I made was to bring in new leadership. The senior management team needed fresh faces, people who understood the direction I wanted to take the company. But it was also important to keep the spirit of the old team alive. We couldn't lose the essence of what had made Cal Ridge great in the first place. It was a delicate balance, but I was determined to get it right. One afternoon, as I sat in my office, a message popped up on my phone. It was from Charles Denham, my longtime ally and one of our largest investors. "Harriet, I've been thinking. Let's meet tomorrow. I want to discuss something important." I immediately felt a sense of foreboding. Charles was never one to send cryptic messages, and the tone of his text had an edge to it that I didn't like. The next day, I met Charles at our usual spot, the golf course. It was where we had spent countless hours discussing business, family, and everything in between. But today there was a different vibe. "Harriet, you've done a remarkable job with Cal Ridge. I'll be the first to admit it," Charles began as we made our way to the first hole. "But there's something I need to talk to you about." I raised an eyebrow, sensing the tension. "What's going on, Charles?" He paused, as though weighing his words carefully. "I've been speaking with a few other investors. They're concerned about Damon's exit. They think he was unfairly treated, and they're wondering if he's going to come back in some capacity. I felt a chill run down my spine. Damon? After everything that's happened? He's gone, Charles. We both know that. Charles sighed, leaning on his club. I know. But there's talk of him wanting to come back in a different role. The board's not entirely sure they're done with him. And if he does come back, there's no guarantee that your position is safe. I stopped in my tracks, the weight of his words settling over me. You're telling me the board might bring him back? After everything he's done? Charles looked at me with sympathy. I don't think they realize the damage that would cause. You've done all the hard work. You've rebuilt trust with the investors, brought the company back from the brink. But if Damon returns in any capacity, it will undo everything. That evening, as I sat with Thomas at dinner, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The board had to know what they were doing. They couldn't possibly bring Damon back into the fold after everything he'd done. Could they? What's going on, Harriet? Thomas asked, his voice full of concern. You've been quiet all evening. I looked up from my plate, the weight of my thoughts finally getting the better of me. Charles thinks the board might bring Damon back. They're considering giving him a role in the company again. Thomas' face darkened. What? After all that happened? I don't know, Thomas. But I can't just let that happen. I've worked too hard to build this company back up. I won't let it fall apart because of one mistake. The next day, I called a meeting with the board. I wasn't going to wait around for them to make a decision about Damon. It was time for me to take control of the situation once and for all. When the meeting started, the tension in the room was palpable. The board members, all 10 of them, looked at me as if they were waiting for me to say something. I've been thinking, I began, my voice steady. And I think it's time we make something clear. Damon Shore is not coming back into this company. He's gone, and that's where it ends. A few board members shifted uncomfortably, but I pressed on. If we want to move forward, if we want to rebuild Cal Ridge into the company it was always meant to be, we need to be united. We need to trust each other. And we need to make sure that the mistakes of the past don't repeat themselves. That day, I made my intentions clear. I wasn't just leading Cal Ridge, I was protecting it. And I was willing to fight for it. I wasn't going to let anyone tear down what I had spent years building. The tension in the room lingered for what felt like an eternity after my bold declaration. The board members were silent, their faces a mixture of surprise, concern, and uncertainty. But I wasn't about to back down. I had spent too many years building trust and laying a foundation that had supported Cal Ridge's growth and success. I wasn't going to let it all unravel just because of one man's arrogance and the board's misplaced loyalty. We need to make decisions not based on fear or external pressure, but on what's best for this company, I continued, my voice firm. We're at a crossroads and we need to move forward with a clear vision. A vision that aligns with the values Cal Ridge was built on: relationships, integrity, and sustainable growth. There was a palpable shift in the room. The board members exchanged glances, their unease giving way to something else, reluctance perhaps, but also the realization that I was right. They had allowed the company to drift too far under Damon's influence, and it was time to correct course. Victoria Coleman, the one board member who had supported me throughout the turmoil, spoke up first. Harriet, you've always been the anchor of this company. If anyone can help us stabilize this mess, it's you. But what are you suggesting we do now? I took a deep breath, knowing the weight of the next words I was about to speak. I'm suggesting that I take full control of the reins. I'll step in as interim CEO, but on my terms. I'll lead the company in a direction that prioritizes relationships over algorithms, long-term growth over quick profits. The room was still for a moment. I could feel the gravity of the decision hanging in the air. They had expected me to offer a compromise, something halfway between staying in the background and taking full control. But I was done with compromising. It was time to make the tough choices. I will also need your full support, and I need you to commit to rebuilding trust with our investors. This isn't going to be easy, but it's the only way forward. Finally, Philip Peterson, the chairman of the board, nodded. You've got it, Harriet. But we'll need to move quickly. The longer we wait, the harder it will be to regain their confidence. I nodded. I'm not here to waste time. We'll begin by making changes that directly address the concerns of our major investors. If we can rebuild trust with them, we'll secure the company's future. And we'll do it the right way, without rushing or cutting corners. The rest of the board slowly came around, acknowledging the necessity of the changes I proposed. They were hesitant, but they knew they had little choice. The damage done under Damon's leadership was extensive, but it wasn't irreparable. Not if we acted swiftly and decisively. The following days were a blur of meetings, phone calls, and emails. I had to juggle negotiations with investors, reorganize the management team, and reassure clients that Cal Ridge was still the company they had trusted for decades. But there was a new energy in the air, a renewed sense of purpose that hadn't been there when Damon was in charge. As I worked tirelessly to stabilize the company, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. 32 years at Cal Ridge. 32 years of building relationships, navigating challenges, and overcoming obstacles. And now, in the twilight of my career, I was faced with a new challenge, one that required every ounce of strength, wisdom, and experience I had. It was in these quiet moments of reflection that I realized something profound. This wasn't just about salvaging Cal Ridge. It was about ensuring that the legacy I had worked so hard to create would endure long after I was gone. Late one evening, as I sat in my office, I received an unexpected call. It was from Charles Denham. His voice, usually calm and assured, was tinged with urgency. "Harriet, we need to talk," he said, his tone clipped. "This situation with the board, it's worse than we thought. They're not as committed to the changes as you think." My heart sank. "What do you mean?" "They're getting cold feet. Some of them are already questioning whether you're the right person to lead the company forward. They're saying you're too tied to the old ways, too focused on relationships. They want someone younger, more aggressive." I felt a surge of frustration rise within me. Are you telling me they're questioning my ability to lead after everything I've done for this company? Charles paused before responding. "It's not just about you, Harriet. It's about what they think the company needs to survive. And right now they're worried about the future. They don't think relationships alone can carry us through the challenges ahead." I sat back in my chair, trying to calm my racing thoughts. "So what now? What do I do?" Charles was silent for a moment before answering. "You need to make a choice, Harriet. If you want to lead this company, you're going to have to fight for it. And you need to decide whether you're willing to risk everything to secure Cal Ridge's future." The next day, I called an emergency board meeting. I wasn't going to let them question my leadership. If they wanted to test me, I would show them what it truly meant to lead with conviction and integrity. When the meeting began, I addressed the board directly. "I've heard the rumors, the whispers. And I won't stand for it. I've spent 32 years building this company, and I'm not about to let anyone tear it down now." The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but I could see the uncertainty in their eyes. They didn't know what to expect from me. And that was precisely what I wanted. "I'm not here to play politics," I continued, my voice firm. "I'm here to make sure Cal Ridge survives. But I will do it my way or not at all." The tension in the room was palpable as I made my final statement. "You want change? Fine. But you need to understand that I am the change. And if you can't accept that, then maybe it's time for me to walk away." The silence was deafening. The silence that followed my declaration felt suffocating. For a moment, it seemed as if the entire room had frozen. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, but none of them dared speak. I sat there, unwavering, letting the weight of my words settle into the air. Finally, it was Philip Peterson, the chairman of the board, who broke the silence. "Harriet," he said, his voice measured, "we understand the gravity of the situation. But you need to know that this isn't just about you or even about the company. It's about our future. We need to get this right or we risk everything." I nodded, my gaze steady. "I understand the stakes, Philip. But you also need to understand that the company's future isn't just about numbers and projections. It's about trust, trust with our investors, trust with our clients, and trust with our people." There was a subtle shift in the room. Some of the tension seemed to ease, but I knew this wasn't over. They had wanted someone to guide them through the crisis, but what they hadn't expected was for me to be the one to step forward and take control. Now that I had, they were grappling with the idea of relinquishing the control they had tried to hold onto for so long. Victoria Coleman spoke next. I've worked alongside you for 32 years, Harriet. I've seen you handle crises, make tough decisions, and always put the company first. But I'll be honest with you. The board wants to see you lead in a way that reassures our investors. We can't afford another misstep. I took a deep breath. I'm not asking for blind trust, Victoria. I'm asking for a chance to prove that the direction I'm proposing is the one that will ensure Cal Ridge's survival. If I'm going to take this on, it's going to be on my terms. And those terms are simple. We go back to what made this company strong in the first place. We focus on relationships, long-term growth, and stability. There was a moment of quiet contemplation before Philip spoke again. We'll support you, Harriet. But this isn't going to be easy. There are forces in play now that are beyond our control. I smiled slightly, the weight of the situation pressing on my shoulders, but I wasn't about to back down. I've handled difficult situations before, Philip. I'm ready. The days that followed the board meeting were a blur of planning, negotiating, and reassuring clients. The board had agreed to my terms, but it was clear that the path ahead was anything but smooth. Investors were nervous, and with good reason. The company had been shaken to its core by the sudden restructuring under Damon Shore's leadership, and there was no quick fix. I spent countless hours on the phone with key investors, explaining the new direction, addressing their concerns, and assuring them that Cal Ridge was not only going to survive but thrive. But even as I worked tirelessly to rebuild trust, there was a gnawing sense of unease. I knew that the battle wasn't just with the investors or the board. It was with myself. I had spent my entire career building Cal Ridge, making it a pillar of stability in a volatile industry. But now, as I sat in the driver's seat of the company, I couldn't help but wonder if I was still the person I used to be. The fire that had once driven me had been dulled by years of corporate politics and compromises. Was I still capable of leading with the same passion I once had? One evening, as I sat in my office reviewing reports, I was interrupted by a knock on the door. It was Laura, my longtime assistant. Her face was tired, but there was a sense of resolve in her expression. I've got something for you, she said, placing a thick file on my desk. It's the report on the restructuring. The one you asked for. I nodded, reaching for the file. As I flipped through the pages, a wave of frustration washed over me. The numbers didn't add up. The plan Damon had put in place was reckless, short-sighted, and ultimately damaging. But I couldn't just tear it all down. I had to fix it, carefully, strategically. I knew this wasn't going to be easy, I said quietly, more to myself than to Laura. She nodded. But you're doing it, Harriet. You're taking control. And I'm with you every step of the way. I looked up at her, grateful for her support. Thank you, Laura. I couldn't do this without you. She smiled faintly before turning to leave. Just don't forget to take care of yourself, okay? The next morning, I found myself facing another difficult conversation, this time with Damon Shore. After weeks of avoiding direct contact, the board had insisted on a meeting to discuss his future role at the company. The tension between us was palpable as he walked into my office, his usual cocky demeanor replaced with something more subdued. "You wanted to see me?" he asked, his voice lacking the usual arrogance. I gestured to the chair across from me. "Sit down, Damon. We need to talk." He hesitated before sitting down, his eyes flicking nervously around the room. "I know things haven't gone the way I planned," he admitted. "But I can fix this. Give me a chance." I studied him for a long moment before speaking. "You had your chance, Damon. And you blew it. You dismantled everything that made this company successful in the first place. You alienated our investors, our clients, and our employees. And now you're asking for a second chance." He looked down, clearly ashamed. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. You didn't understand what you were dealing with," I interrupted. "You thought you could just push things forward without understanding the foundation that was already here. You didn't build Cal Ridge. I did. And I won't let you destroy it just because you wanted to make a name for yourself." There was silence between us for a long time, the weight of the situation sinking in. Damon seemed to realize the gravity of his actions, but it was too late. The damage had already been done. "You're done here, Damon," I said, my voice steady. "You'll be placed in a role that doesn't involve client relationships. You're not in charge anymore." His shoulders slumped and he nodded, acknowledging his defeat. The days passed in a blur of meetings, negotiations, and adjustments. I found myself in the thick of it all, pushing forward with the changes I had promised. My role as interim CEO was beginning to feel more natural, though there was still a part of me that longed for the quiet of retirement. But I had a job to do and I wasn't about to let anyone down. By now, the investors were cautiously optimistic. Marion Bay, Zentran, and Trevanta had all reinstated their commitments, albeit with some new conditions. Charles, Eleanor, and Jeffrey continued to stand by me, offering their unwavering support as I navigated through the aftermath of the reshuffling. And while Damon had been removed from the leadership team, his presence lingered in the halls of the company, a reminder of the chaos he had unleashed. But I didn't dwell on it. There was no time for resentment or anger. The company needed stability, and I was the one who had to provide it. The next few weeks were crucial. We had to prove to our clients, to the board, and to ourselves that Cal Ridge wasn't just a shell of its former self. We had to show that, under new leadership, the company could rise from the ashes and thrive once more. And then, just as things were starting to settle, I received a call that would change everything. It was Victoria, her voice urgent. "Harriet, there's something you need to see. The board is meeting today and they want to make you an offer." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "What kind of offer?" "Come to the meeting. You'll see for yourself." I walked into the boardroom that afternoon, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was tense, filled with the usual suspects, Philip, Victoria, and several other members of the board, including the ever-stoic Jeffrey Williams. I took my seat at the head of the table, my gaze sweeping over the familiar faces. "We've had some discussions," Philip began, "and after much consideration we've come to a decision." I held my breath, waiting for him to continue. "We'd like to offer you the permanent position of CEO, Harriet. We believe that you're the right person to lead Cal Ridge into the future, not just temporarily but for the long term." There it was, the moment I had been dreading, yet somehow also expecting. The board wanted me to stay on as CEO, to take the reins permanently and lead the company forward. I had always prided myself on my ability to make tough decisions, but this was different. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, each one more confusing than the last. Was I ready for this? Was I willing to put in the time and energy that it would take to steer this company through such uncertain waters? For a moment I said nothing. The silence in the room was thick with expectation. Finally I spoke. "I'm honored by your offer, but I need time to think. I didn't come back to be CEO. I came back to fix what was broken, to set things right. If I stay, it will be on my terms." The room fell silent again, this time with a sense of respect. They understood that I wasn't interested in a position for the sake of power or prestige. I wanted to make a real difference. "I'll let you know my decision soon," I added, standing up to leave. "But for now, let's focus on the work that still needs to be done." The next few days were a whirlwind of contemplation. I spent long hours alone, reflecting on my past, my future, and what it all meant. I had built this company from the ground up, and now, in its most fragile state, it was asking me to take the helm again. But something had shifted within me during the past few weeks. I had been so focused on doing the right thing for the company that I had forgotten to consider what was right for me. For once, I needed to prioritize my own needs, my own desires. I wasn't the same person I had been when I first started at Cal Ridge. I had learned so much, not just about business but about myself. When I finally made my decision, it was a quiet one. I called Victoria and Philip, told them I would take the job, but on my own terms. I would lead Cal Ridge as its permanent CEO, but I would do so with a renewed focus on balance, on relationships, on people, and on long-term success. It wasn't going to be easy, but nothing worth having ever is.